Hi, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. Tonight, I'm going to be your host, Jim Nettles, and we're going to be diving into the business of indie comics. We're going to be getting past our favorites of DC and Marvel and diving more into the dark waters that are where we all fear to tread. So, before we go too far down that path, let's see who all has come in tonight. So, Bobby, you are up first.
Woohoo! First, all right. Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I write all kinds of stuff: comics, novels, short stories, etc. Comics were my first love. Comics is what got me interested in telling stories. Was comics. So I love writing comics. I write them as often as I can, and they're a lot of fun. So that's me.
Michael?
My name is Michael Nunneley. I'm the founder of Omen Comics, the co-founder of Revelation Comics, and I'm the writer of Omen, Gallowsman, Dragon Girl, Albino Warrior, Dark Oracles, Satyr, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm even doing some things for Raincross Press. I got into I wrote my first comic when I was 12 years old, but I didn't get into indie comics till about 2016. That's kind of a complicated story, so we'll get into that in a little bit, I guess.
David?
My name is David Taylor II. I'm the creator of the Nephilim Wars. I have 4 projects coming out this year. And I'm the writer, I'm the writer and the editor, and I'll talk more about that. Been reading comics since I was 4 years old. It's what my father used to teach me to read. He used the newspaper, the Bible, and comic books. And I still love all 3 to this day. So they've been a part of my life since I was a young warthog.
And now the other David. You blew my joke. I was going to go for David and David too.
Hi, I'm David Pepose, Ringo Award-winning writer of books like Savage Avengers, Fantastic Four, Avengers Unlimited. But I got my start and continue to work in the creator-owned sphere with books like Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel, The OZ, and Scout's Honor. I'm a third-generation comics reader, and I've been a part of the comics industry in some form or fashion for about 15 years, and I'm thrilled to be here.
So let's actually start into how you got your intro into comics, period. Because again, for a lot of us, that's that first love of reading. I mean, I grew up on the standards, DC, Marvel, but I also got into kind of the indie scene probably in the late 90s, where it was fun to see stuff that was a little different. That was kind of that early days where people were starting to make small runs of books and being able to get them out there commercially. So, Bobby, what was kind of your first real big intro into comics, and especially into indie comics?
The first comics that I ever owned was, I remember pestering my mother. We were in the checkout at a Zaire, which doesn't exist anymore. And I remember we were in the checkout. I couldn't have been no more than 6, 7, I guess. But I loved Spider-Man from the cartoon that would rerun in the afternoons after I got out of school. And so here they had the little 3-packs in the checkout aisles. And oh my God, this one has 2 Spider-Man books. And you can't see what's in the middle. There's 2 Spider-Man books. And oh my God, this is awesome. Can I have them? Can I have them? And I pestered her until, to shut me up, she said, fine. Because my mother was not a fan of the comics. She thought it was gonna ruin me forever. And well, looking at what I do for a living, she might have been right. But she let me take these home, and it was this amazing thing where it was 3 consecutive issues. Like, I didn't realize that comics were ongoing stories until I got those. And it was Amazing Spider-Man issues 192, 193, and 194. And I read them, and I was hooked. And it took me many, many years to get issue 195. So, I mean, I went a good 15 years before I knew what happened next. But that was the hook. That was the thing that just like opened up this world to me. It's like, holy crap, these are good. And I would pick up a few others here and there. Like I said, my parents were not big fans. But one summer, a couple of years later, I had a cousin who came to stay with us for the summer because he was working down here. He didn't live in Georgia. And he would go every week to a comic book store, which I didn't know was a thing until he started bringing home stacks of comics. And he goes, "Here, you want to read some comics?" And that kind of opened me up to reading all these books. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the medium and how to do it. My grand dream was, I can do this. I'm going to be a comic book artist. Well, turns out I'm not quite good enough of an artist to be a comic book artist, but I started writing stories to have stuff to draw and realized that, through some people telling me, it's like, you should focus on that part of it. And so I did that, and eventually I was able to, I did some indie books with some people, and then I eventually sold a script to a publisher and got hired to work on some of their books. And yeah, so it was kind of a nice, comics were my intro into getting published. They were my intro into being creative, my intro into, I want to tell stories for a living. So, but it started with those Spider-Man books. So it's all Spider-Man's fault.
Nice.
Michael.
Well, I mean, I suppose I first got into comics because of mythology. I had gotten loaned the first Secret Wars series by a friend of my uncle's. So that was the first time I'd read a comic. But the first time I bought one, when I really got hooked on it, I went down to the store. I'm going to buy some candy. I was like 8 years old. And I'm walking by the aisle, and I see out of the corner of my eye on the spinner rack, I see a comic book that says The Mighty Thor on the front of it. And I went, holy crap, like, wow. They got Thor in a comic book, and I went and looked at it, and I'm flipping through it, and I've been hooked ever since. I've been buying comics ever since then. But when getting into indie comics, that really honestly didn't happen until like I'm gonna say about 2015 or so. I started an online comics magazine called the Chico Comics Page, where we reviewed comics and interviewed creators and that kind of thing. And I just started, I gathered all the comics I could to review and stuff. And I just really got into the world of indie comics with all the different people, because indie comics creators don't really have a whole lot of people out there going, hey, I want to review your books. You know what I mean? That finding people to do that is difficult. And so we really kind of filled that niche for a while, and I just really got into the medium there. That actually, the Chico Comics Page actually ended up leading into my getting into making comics together, all together. All the people that I work with at Omen Comics, I met through the Chico Comics Page.
Thanks.
David P.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm a third generation comics reader. My grandfather was a comics fan. My mother's a comics fan. And for me, I remember very early on, my parents got me some comics when I was 5, 6 years old. They got me Amazing Spider-Man 346, Captain America 384, Silver Surfer 47.
And now I feel old. Sorry.
Incredible Hulk 364.
Oh,
And those comics were great. I mean, I carried that Spider-Man comic with me everywhere. But shortly thereafter, my mother got me a copy of the Infinity War #2. And that's really the thing that kind of crystallized it all for me. I realized then as a kid, like, oh, all these characters, they knew each other. They all were kind of coexisting in the same world. And it really, it blew my mind. I mean, it was the astronaut job for me in a lot of ways. And so in college, right out of college, I wound up interning at DC Comics. I worked on books like Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P. It also happened to be 2008, so there was a horrible recession going on with no jobs. But I was really lucky that I managed to land at Newsarama. I wrote reviews for them for a long time. I was the reviews editor for the better part of a decade. And what wound up happening was I kind of hit a little bit of a crisis of fate. I'm sure everybody on this panel can empathize that. I think sometimes loving comics, it can be like loving the Mets. It's you have your good days and you have your bad days. It kind of comes in waves and ebbs and flows. And I had a moment where I wasn't really responding to a lot of what I was reading, and I had a real epiphany that I said, well, if there's not comics that I'm enjoying, maybe I need to make the comics that I would want to read, or I need to find a new hobby. And I obviously couldn't leave comics behind. And so I started writing scripts of my own. And my very first script was a book called Spencer and Locke. It was What If Calvin and Hobbes Grew Up in Sin City? And I really enjoyed the process of writing it. I found an artist who did some pitch pages. I really enjoyed that. I kind of shopped it around on a lark, not thinking that it would go anywhere. But a publisher took us out of the slush pile immediately and said, how soon can you get this book done? And I've been lucky enough to be doing that ever since.
Mr. Taylor, sir.
Going to the newsstand at the age of 4 was a multi-sensory experience. So I still remember what the corner sounds like. And I know where the newsstand is right now. I visit it when I go to my hometown. But it's the smell. There's a smell that fresh ink and fresh newspapers and fresh cut books have that's unbelievable. And I remember everything about it. I remember going to McDonald's with my dad and the time I spent with my dad. So my first comic was a Fantastic Four comic, and I was hooked from the cover. I was stunned. I loved everything about it. I loved the story. I loved the costumes. I loved the dynamic of the heroes. I loved how it was low-key tragedy as well as superhero adventure, and they didn't have masks, and it went against the grain at the time. And my little kid mind just whoosh, and I've been hooked ever since. And I haven't been 4 in a while, so it's been a long time. In terms of me creating comics, I've been writing comics since I was like 7 years old. It's just that life happens. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. In terms of my introduction to, I guess, what we would call recognized indie comics, when the age or the era of Image first happened, I didn't understand it. I'm like, okay, so we got the big two, and like, what is this? This is a protest of writers and creators and artists. I didn't really understand it when I first encountered it. And then the book that got me into it was Savage Dragon. I love Savage Dragon. It was a combination of a bunch of different things. A semi-Hulk-like character, a police-like character, someone super strong but super intelligent, but someone that couldn't pass for human, some more mutant tropes, if you will. And I thought that was great. I was like, Larson's hitting on something right here. So in terms of me writing them now, I am literally just getting back to stories I wrote when I was a boy. So the stuff that a lot of stuff I'm working on now, I've had in my arsenal for a long time. It's just life happens. Sometimes life happens in the middle. If you are fortunate enough to have a follower like Venus and Serena Williams that puts a tennis racket in your hand and said, this is what you're supposed to do, then you can get on track when you're still in single digit living under the age of 10. If not, you might have to trial and error your way. So that's why you see a lot of people in later decades of their lives saying, you know what? I really want to be in the comics. You know what? This is what I really love. You know what? I want to try to make a living doing this, because sometimes life just happens. So all I can say is I'm glad to be back. And I just have so many stories to tell. But I love everything about the process, except no one can edit their own work. You need a third-party editor. And you're not going to agree with everything they say, but you need those eyes on it. So, well, I just love it. I love it through and through.
I'm laughing a little bit here because I just did a workshop for a group a couple of weeks ago that is, the average age in this group is probably 65. A lot of them are working on their first books, and a lot of them, when we were in there, talked about the fact of they had been wanting to do this their entire lives and waited till now to do it. And that's the reason I'm sitting here looking at this going. And a lot of what came out of that first round of stories was looking and talking about, yeah, the the big boys are great. They inspired, they got us going. But at a certain point in life, we hit that, I'm not getting the story I want. I'm not seeing the story that tells me or connects to me. And that, really, I think is the beauty of indie comics, is because you get a lot more latitude in the kinds of stories you get to tell. You don't have to necessarily hit the same kinds of numbers, but you also get, just like the indie publishing business, you get to tell the stories that may not necessarily be as quote unquote commercial, but they can, a lot of time, can have a lot more impact. So Michael, let's talk about your start of your journey in writing and creating indie comics. What was that like for you, and what drove you to go and say, yeah, I'm gonna do it this way?
Well, like David there, like I said, I wrote my first comic when I was 12, and granted, it was very derivative, but I had several characters that I'd been working on and building for years that weren't necessarily into a story. I had a few stories here and there, but I mostly had a bunch of stuff that wasn't necessarily attached to anything, and it was really just kind of life happens, got in the way, like you guys are talking about there. But when I was working with the Chico Comics page, I had a guy approach me about writing comics and creating a universe that he wanted to build, and he asked me if I was capable of even building a universe for him, and I was like, well, I've got about 15 characters. I think I could probably manage that. So I started writing for him. The idea was we were going to do some kind of a Kickstarter thing that I was going to get paid at some point in the future, kind of a deal, and let me tell you, that's a bad idea. So I'd actually written a couple of issues for him, 3 in fact, before I found out that not only was he not really all that serious, he wasn't going to run a Kickstarter, and I wasn't going to get paid. So I told him, all right, look, this is the deal. I'm walking with the rights to everything I just created, and you're basically just going to have to deal with it. And he said, okay. So here's the little thing, though. He had me create this character named Omen for him. Now, this character was basically Spawn with a different name. And I'm like, I'm not writing that. This is entirely plagiaristic. I'm just not going to do it. So I kind of reworked him into this whole other character. But I kept the name for him. Anyway, after I found out that I wasn't going to get paid and I walked, I actually named my company Omen Comics in a kind of spiting him for having not paid me, and it was that's kind of how I got my first intro into it. But I really got the idea for this story about 2014, about right around in there. There was an event called a Tetrad. Which a blood moon tetrad, which means that for every 6 months for 2 years there was a blood moon. And everybody was talking about how it was this huge, big event, like it was prophetic and all this stuff, and the end times and everything was happening. And I was like, you know what? What if I take my characters that I've got and I put them into a universe where apocalypse of all kinds are happening, where mythologies of all kinds are happening, and I kind of built this universe around that, and I started writing titles like Omen and Gallowsman and stuff like that, but I couldn't do it all myself. There was just too much out there, and so that's when I reached out to people like Steve Sellers, who was a reviewer for me, and he agreed to start doing White Druid and Guardians of Aleum and stuff like that, and that really helped out a lot. I really needed that. I also got my artist Tosin Awasika. I had interviewed him, and he was willing to work with my budget. Guido Martinez, I met him on Chico Comics page. He was able to get into my work with my budget, and while we started with only being able to afford 1 page a month, we have since put out about 12 comics. So I mean, things worked out okay in the end.
David P.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it was just, I wanted to be in the game. I think I grew up in the Midwest. I didn't really have any creative role models, so to speak. And so the job seemed, it was really, when I say an astronaut job, it really felt like about as likely as, being in St. Louis and saying, okay, we'll just go to the moon. It felt so out of reach. And I kind of had to take a zigzag approach to get here. But for me, the thing that I love so much about independent comics, that really is, if you want to play the game, if you want to write comics of any kind, it's not the way that it was, say, in like the 80s, where a lot of people, they would get their start working on superheroes, and they would take that cachet that they've built on superheroes and then bring them sort of as like an image style exodus to their own creator-owned work. That's not really how the market works anymore. If you want to make comics of any stripe, independent comics that is the ground floor. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it, whether you're signing up with a small publisher, places like SourcePoint Press or Scout, or if you're going the Kickstarter route. But that's really, I think that is a great place for people to both kind of flex their muscles a little bit in terms of what their creative output is. But it's also a great place to kind of learn the ropes. I feel like when you're starting out in the indie scene, the expectations, people don't have the same expectations that they would of sort of a long established creator. And I think that gives you a lot of room to take risks and to learn on the job. And so I've been really grateful for my time in the indie scene. And I mean, I'm still working on independent work because I think it's a great way to kind of remember the fundamentals and the foundations of storytelling. And that you can take with you anywhere.
Nice.
David T.
Long story short, I wrote my first novel and I wrote my first sci-fi book. My first sci-fi book was Amazon had a program at the time where you could write into a story world that already existed. The author opened it up. And so I wrote a story for Wayward Pines, which was a book series, and it was on Fox TV. And my book went to number 2 in less than 30 days. And then my novel, Lucifer's Soldier, Serpents, and Sin, which chronicles how the war in heaven got started, went number 1 in 3 countries. And I said, all right, I can do this. Because that story went from, I had an image. I wonder what would it be like if one day you were a beautiful angel in heaven and then you fall to earth and then you look at yourself in a pool of water. And now you're this twisted, ugly, gnarly thing, this beast. And that image just really struck me. And I said, I started writing, became a short story. I wrote and wrote and wrote until it became a novel. And that novel did well. And I said, I have third-party objective people telling me that it's good. I mean, I had confidence in what I was doing, but I had people that had no skin in the game saying, this is good. You should do this. What ended up happening was my mind immediately created a story world where I wanted to cross-platform the stories. So in that realm, I have novels, I have a novella, I have RPG, role-playing game, I have coloring books, and I have comic books, which is what you see behind me with the Nephilim Wars. And so I said, I really want to create this whole thing. So I pitched the Nephilim Wars to Image. And I was all gung-ho. I'm like, and they're like, and not so much. I said, sleeves roll up. All right, I bet you I'll do it myself. So I started investigating what that meant. And at this point, I can say, as an entrepreneur, how important it is to make your mistakes and learn from them, because there's so much you have to deal with if you're trying to create a comic. But that's really where all of this came from. And then so it was kind of a progression of, remember all them stories you wrote? Now, I still have the comics I drew when I was young. So I let my son see them and he said, Dad, you did all this? I said, yeah. He said, you should make this, like you should make this happen. And I said, yeah. And he told me that for years. So then I finally got to a point where I said, yeah, my boy was right. And so now I'm on a path where, like David P was saying, and like Michael was saying, I want to write as much as I can. I have original stuff that I've created, but I want to collab. One of the projects having coming out this year is a collab. Me and Michael working with Raincross with David and Steve and Jeff. And it's just like, it's what David P said. He summed it up perfectly. I want to be in the game.
Yeah.
You can't say it any better than that. And the reason or the way when you've hit is when you can't get enough. It's when it gives you energy. It's when you go to bed thinking about it. You wake up thinking about it. You love being around like your boys, like on podcasts like this, can't get enough of talking about it, that kind of thing. That's how you know when you've come home. And so my first taste of being home was when I went to my first C2E2, probably the second biggest geek con in America, right here in Chicago. And I didn't want to leave. Because when you go to a Comic Con, you're like, where's the money I'm spending? I want all the jackets, all the t-shirts. I want all the merch. I want all the signatures. I mean, can't get enough. So it really took, I guess, me getting some success in other writing venues to propel me to do what I really want. Well, I mean, I still write a whole bunch of different stuff, but the comic stuff is just, in my heart. But I also found out, which I'm sure you're going to talk about shortly, the steps, the process. Holy cow, is not for the faint of heart. But yet can't get enough.
I just have to say, as a D&D player, I am very impressed with the fact that you created an RPG out of your world there. That is super impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Bobby, how about you?
Yeah, when I first got into writing and wanting to create comics, it was in the 80s, so there was not really the do-it-yourself approach was not quite as readily available as it is today. We did a lot of stuff locally, but if you didn't live local to us, you didn't see our stuff. So that indie was a local thing. But then I did a while. I kind of like Michael was saying, you did the website and all. We did fanzines back in the 80s. When we were interviewing creators and we were writing articles and sharing news, but we were also doing our own comics and putting them in the fanzines and stuff like that. So that was kind of the first taste for me of seeing my stuff in print, getting it out there. And there were, I think too, in the 80s, one of the things that kind of excited me about doing, non-Marvel, non-DC stuff was in the 80s, we had these little indies that popped up, but guys who were working for Marvel and DC were doing things. George Perez is doing science fiction stuff in these magazines here while he's still doing Teen Titans, that kind of stuff. And so I kind of got there by following creators I liked to these other things that they were trying. And it did open up this whole world. There were new publishers that popped up. Like I remember being a big fan of AC Comics when they started, and that was kind of one of the places too. A lot of the, people, it was kind of a good training ground, kind of like Charlton was in the 70s for people that were, it was kind of their first steps in moving up. And so I kind of recognized that. And so watching what those guys were doing. And then, of course, Dark Horse started not long after that. And then in the 90s, when what Image did, a lot of these guys kind of, followed those same kind of paths to doing their own thing. And so that inspired me to try it. But for the longest time, I didn't have a way to do my own stuff and get it out to the masses. I did spend a lot of time submitting. There were many years I didn't know how to end a story because I only wrote 5 pages, sent it off. Oh, we don't like it. Great, move on. So the first time I had to write a whole issue was like weird. Yeah, so those were my intros, and you get turned down enough and that kind of stuff. And then eventually what happens is eventually you do find someone that goes, hey, this is pretty good. And they give you an opportunity. And that's kind of what happened with me. My first professional comic came from me doing a cold submission and just saying, here's what I can do. And they were like, it took a year. It was a year after I sent it in, but they were like, hey, we just lost, our writer has left to do something else. Would you be willing to try out? And that was at least, gave me a published book in my hand that was sold around the world that I could then go and use to show other publishers and try to get into it. And so that's kind of how I started, was doing it for other publishers. And I still do that a lot today, more so than I do myself, just because of budgetary reasons. Making comics, as it's been mentioned here, is not easy and it's not cheap.
No.
So, but I do a lot of work. I love writing comics, so I do a lot of work for hire. I work for different publishers of different sizes and stripes. I've done stuff with indie guys, and I've done stuff with like Dark Horse and IDW and guys like that. But so it's just different. It's different size. The size of the publisher is not always important. Sometimes it's what you're getting to do. I've got to work on projects that I enjoy and do that. I've also created some of my own, and we've gone the purely independent route and get it put together and out and all that. So it's fun. It's just a different way of telling stories that allows me to do something that I don't do with like my novels. It's definitely a different part of your brain. Plus, you guys were just talking about it here a minute ago. I love working with an artist. There is nothing like the feel as a comic book writer of opening your email and seeing new pages. Yeah. Right, guys? That is like one of the coolest feelings in the world. Right. Yeah. It's never how I saw it when I wrote it, but it's that, and I know if it makes me feel that way, the hope is the audience will feel that way, seeing those pages going, oh, that's beautiful. That works. And so that's one of the little perks about it. So I love being part of a team, and especially when you find people that you really click with, and then it's even better because you can shorthand with each other, and there's, you're each bringing out the best in each other, where together, you guys can create something better than either of you could on your own. Yeah. There's a magic that happens somewhere in the creative process there that, if I could bottle it, so that's kind of how I kind of got into the comics that way. So, and now it's just, most of the work I do these days is for, work for hire stuff, but I still dip my toe in and going like, ooh, I get the urge to create something, and, but yeah.
If I could just comment on that, I think we can all agree with this. You talked about with the getting the email from your artist. I think I know why. At least why it is for me. Why that is so exciting. Up until that point, this story, these characters have only existed in your mind. And it's like when you get that art in, you actually get it's like, it's on page, but it's like you get to see your character come to life. Yeah. Like it's actually real right here in front of you. And I think, I don't know about the rest of you, but that's why I really love it.
Mm-hmm. And also you kind of replicate that feeling when you hold the finished product in your hand for the first time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's moved from here to in my hand. That's really cool. There's something fantastic about that. And that feeling has never gone away. As many books as I've had come out, that feeling doesn't go away. There is something just intrinsically exciting about seeing it come, seeing it come to life, seeing it done.
Yeah.
And
that, if I can just piggyback on that what Bobby just said is what I tell other people that are trying to get into writing. So once you get your book in your hand, it's going to change your life forever. You can't go back. You'll never be who you were there's something about it that's on some levels undefinable, but it propels you into a different realm of life when you realize that you are a creator and that is real, and that it opens the faucet, if you will, opens the spigot of creativity and propels you to different levels. There's nothing like it. And
it's definitely an endorphin rush.
Yeah,
there's something
an addicting one at that.
Yeah, it makes you want to do it again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It makes all the griping and the headaches and the stuff that you went through putting this stuff together
totally worth it.
It's totally worth it. No problem. You forget all about that. And it's just,
because it's a birth process. It's no different from the birth process. Seed is released, pregnancy happens, gestation, and then you got to go through the labor pain to push it out. But once you push it out, you're so happy is born into the world, you forget all the pain, just like you just said.
Yeah.
In terms of finding the whole artist rush thing, I agree 100% with Michael. And the thing about it is, if you can find somebody that can realize your vision like you see it in your head, not only will they do that, but they tend to turn it up and it's better than what you thought. And then the way I write like a movie director. So I don't just write words. That's a new skill I had to learn this season because somebody said about, artists and creativity. And I never thought about it because I'm an artist myself, but I see the whole thing. So a friend of mine said, no, some artists want more flexibility. So I had to learn. So I had to grow and change, but I write like a movie director. So I see the angles. I see how far back, how far close. I see close-ups. I see hair on the wrist. I see all that when I envision a comic. And when you have someone that can make that happen, man, it's just so sweet. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I write full script when I write comics, but I also I don't do the camera angles for that reason, unless it's something absolutely super specific that we need for a reason. If you've got a character flying and he's looking down from, that's kind of important. But yeah, I try to be flexible when I work with the artist. The first thing I tell them is, look, I wrote it full script just so you see my thought, what people are saying, what needs to be there this way. I am not 100% married to it has to be 5 panels. I'm flexible. As long as we're telling the story, let's do it in the best way possible. We just have to be cognizant of things like you don't want to screw up your page turn reveals, that kind of thing, because you can't get jump scares in comics like you do in movies. So big reveals need to be on an even numbered page because that's when you turn the page, things like that we have to plan for. But for the most part, though, I'm flexible enough to go, look, we can change, things around if we need to. Does this work better this way? Because at the end of the day, we're writer, artist, colorist, letterer. All of us want to put out the best story possible. And so if we were trying to all work together, but yeah, it was rough for me too at first. It's like, what do you mean you want to change something? But so that was the skill I kind of had to learn to let go and be flexible. And you get a lot of good stuff though. A lot of times you can have really cool things because the artist will say something or draw something that I hadn't thought of.
Well, and let's actually dive a little bit deeper into the mechanics of doing a book, because when you're writing a novel or a short story or novella, whatever else, you're really dealing with one piece of art or maybe two for the most part. You've got the cover art, maybe some promotional stuff, and occasionally you're going to have some sketches and stuff through the book, but pretty much it's the text you're telling the story with. In a comic, you get gorgeous artwork that helps as much to tell the story as the words and the language, because you get a lot more tools to convey it, but you got a lot fewer words. And so when you're going about this, it is a lot more expensive process, potentially, depending on editing and all these kinds of other parts of the mechanics. But let's actually talk about the mechanics of putting a book together. As David said, it's birthing a child. However, hopefully this child is one that's going to produce some returns and some money, not continue to cost us for the next 20. So,
boy, are you in the wrong business?
So, David P., from your perspective, what's the business look like? What's the engine look like? What's a good piece of how the books come to fruition? And also, what's one thing you wish you'd have known or the biggest mistake you've made? I'll leave that one up to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I always say, the thing that prepared me most for surviving in comics, honestly, was online dating in New York. You really you have to kiss a lot of frogs, and it's very much a process, particularly when kind of matchmaking your creative team. And I think that's really the bedrock of all of this is you want to find, you kind of have to hit 3 things at the same time. You need to find somebody who is reliable, who will get the book done, somebody who's available, somebody who fits within your budget. And then on top of all that, somebody who might fit the work stylistically. And there's a lot of trial and error that goes into that I think a lot of people don't really understand. I think that's probably the number one question I'm always asked is, how do you find an artist? And the answer for me is, you're just constantly on the lookout, particularly with your first few books. Once you have a body of work that you can share, it's a little easier to kind of network with other people who are working. But for me, when I was starting out, I was working with people who they were getting their first professional credits as well. George Santiago Jr., who it was just his birthday this week, belated birthday to my buddy. He had just graduated from SCAD when I reached out to him about drawing Spencer and Locke. And for me, I think that was really helpful, finding somebody who was kind of as new and hungry to succeed as I was. So I think there's, it's just a lot of swings, and that's just getting the pitch together. And then you got to take a lot of swings in terms of pitching it around to different publishers, or deciding, maybe you'll self-publish it on your own. I think as far as mistakes go, I think I've been very fortunate, but I think the mistake, and it's kind of one that's unavoidable, is just, sometimes you match up with somebody who winds up not being the right fit. Reliability is really kind of the number one thing I talk about, because I can't tell you how many times that I've put together pitches with artists, some of whom I've paid, who then flake out and don't do the work. And that sucks, and it kind of adds more financial pressure to the business than maybe one needs. Luckily, I do think that's something that occasionally you can start to grow out of a little bit as you are putting in the reps. But I think it's, I always say it's a real garage band mentality. You have to find your artist, your line artist, and whether they do their own inks or not, probably they will at the stage in the game. You need to find a colorist. Usually it is a separate colorist. You need to find a letterer. God help you if you try to do it on your own. That is like the number one way that you can spot that somebody's not ready for prime time. There are freelance editors out there, but you also want to figure out like who actually has done the work and who is just somebody on the internet saying that they're an editor. Because if it's somebody on the internet saying they're an editor and have no experience doing this, you're throwing your money out the window.
It's a nightmare.
I need to say amen to that. What he just said. Yeah, amen on that.
But I think the thing about mistakes is you learn by making them. I will say that I think it's rare to make a mistake that's so big in the comics industry that you've like blown up your career. Besides don't like sexually harass your peers and like don't say like slurs. But like within like the realm of reason, most setbacks are learning opportunities. And I think everybody kind of has to make them. And there are ways that you can kind of make some mistakes in the comfort of your own home. I wrote a script every day for 90 days. And many of them were terrible. But by the time that I hit like number 90, they started being halfway decent. And that I was kind of more ready for prime time. So when my first book came out, people thought, oh, like, okay, he seems to know what he's doing. There are other people who say, nope, I am going to, put my first book out there. It's going to get published. I don't care if if it's a little rougher around the edges. And that is a perfectly valid thing as well, because you're still putting in the reps. So I think I would just say, try to control your descent as best you can, but know that making mistakes is kind of inevitable. And as long any landing that you can walk away from, then that it was worth the experience.
David T.
You want me to answer all them same questions?
Oh yeah. What's the thing from the business side that you think everybody needs to know? And being the fact that you've got the novels, you've got coloring books, you've got comic books, you've got the RPG, you've built a wide swath of product here. What does somebody need to know about the business side of trying to create all of this? And what was your big mistake?
Okay. The most important thing I could say about the business side is that you must be organized. The industry lends itself to seat of your pants flying, but that is not sustainable. So at some point, you must be organized and you must develop a process that works for you. Because the best way to be successful more often than not is to see it all before you start. Reverse engineering is the key. So you start with your result and say, what do I want? What do I want the book to look like? Where do I want my characters to be in my story? What do I want my cover to look like? You map all that out from the jump and then engineer a plan to get there. That's the thing that I would most tell anybody, and that's what I do. If you do it any other way, you're going to do three things. First thing you're going to do is you're going to write yourself into a corner. Second thing you're going to do is you're going to run out of money. Mm-hmm. Third thing you're going to do is you're not going to be satisfied with the end product. So save yourself all that frustration and visualize and map it out in detail, and then reverse engineer on how to get there is the easiest way to hit the bullseye every time. In terms of my biggest mistake, I have to agree with everything David P. was saying. You kind of have to make them, because that's part of being an entrepreneur. And make no mistake, you are an entrepreneur if you do indie comics. There's you and your company working for you and your intellectual property. But I guess my biggest mistake, I guess I would say, is perhaps not vetting the people I was working with well enough when I first started. Because when you first started, you're just happy to find an artist that's willing to work on your book. You're just like that kind of thing, but you need to vet them. They need to have references and a network and different kind of stuff. And I didn't know that when I first started. And some people just show up. If you put ads out there or you're advertising for paid work, they show up and they have no intention of delivering any product. They're just going to take your money. So you have to learn how to find people you can trust. You have to learn how to have a very thorough and detailed contract so everybody understands what's going on. You have to work out your payment agreements. Some people won't work without a deposit. Some people will do 25% of the job and then take, some money so we can trust each other. You got to work that out. Some people are going to take your money and run. I'm sad to say. So I would have to say not vetting people out because I was just so gung-ho about getting it done. But that can't discourage you, because that will happen in every industry that's not unique to comics. There is no area of business where there aren't people out there that specialize in trying to, run some type of scam. So you can't let that discourage you. You have to learn from it. And don't be sending people all these huge lump sums of money and you ain't got no content. So, don't give them the whole Happy Meal. Send them a pack of fries and say, okay, draw that and we'll be all right.
Yeah, and you are preaching one of the things that I regularly preach, which is if you're going to do this, you own a business. You are an entrepreneur, you got to act that way. And you're going to face the exact same lessons we all face.
That's right. That's right.
Bobby, how about you? What's something you think somebody needs to know, and what was your opportunity to learn?
Well, I think too, you have to go into it knowing what you want. There are people that create comics as a hobby, and they're fine with that, and that's nothing wrong with that. If just doing it for fun and just, you're not trying to build a career, you're just having fun, there's nothing wrong with that. You can run your business that way. You can work. That means you can draw when you feel like it or write when you feel like it. If your goal is to do this as your job, you have to treat it like a job. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, like any other job, there's going to be more times than not where you're going to look for, I'd rather do anything else. You're going to find ways to sabotage yourself. You have to avoid that. Or at least that's me. I get up, I'm my worst enemy. Once I sit down and start working, I'm fine. But getting me there, what's that old joke about? I'm a writer, so today I'm going to write, but first, so doing that, deciding what your goal is. If you want to do this as a career, you want to try to make money at this, you want to grow your IPs, et cetera, et cetera. Like David said, come up with a plan. Know what you want to do. Know what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with doing this stuff as a hobby. It's just like writing novels. There's nothing wrong with doing it as a hobby, if that's what you want. If your goal is, I want this to be my business, then you can't wait for the muse to hit you. You have to put your butt in the chair and start writing, or start drawing or start whatever. Because there's a lot that goes into, I mean, we're basically all talking about the writing process here, but there is so much more that goes into the comics or anything that we're writing than writing. You know, once you start putting things into the world, once the book is created, there's still a whole lot of work that we have to do. Marketing, getting it into stores. How do we get out doing things like this, doing podcasts, doing interviews, going to conventions? Are we going to sell it mail order, or are we going to try to get it in previews? You know, are we going to go straight to comic shops and talk to them? Are we going to, are we doing a Kickstarter? Are we, whatever. There's all these other things that you have to do. And it can, if you're not careful, overwhelm you to where you realize I'm working my butt off. I haven't written a thing. So while you're doing all this other stuff, you've still got to create content. So it becomes, you know, like they were saying with the business side of it, you have to plan. You have to know these things have to happen. And then you juggle that. And then if you work for other people on top of that, like I have to, you know, I often equate writing to juggling, because I'm in the middle of something here and man, I'm doing good. And then edits come in and you have to stop, because there's usually a very quick turnaround from the publisher on edits. Stop, juggle. Okay, this ball's in the air while I work on this. You finish that. Oh, here comes, you know, edits from another publisher, or the galley proof, or approve this cover, or, you know, there's all that kind of stuff that you have to do. So having that plan of how you're going to attack things, setting deadlines, meeting deadlines, that kind of stuff is very important. Deciding, you know, it's just as important as doing the writing. I think also too, when you're writing comics, it's important to know that most of what we write, the reader never sees, because we're writing a lot of stuff for the artists, the colorist, the letterer. This is we're telling them information. Like whenever you see in a comic, because we do this a lot, we see shadowy characters watching our heroes do something, or, well, we've got to tell the artist who that is. You know, we're not writing to them like, ooh, who's watching that? No, we have to tell them. They have to know. So a lot of what we do is very informational. And so that may never, in our words, make it to the reader, but it makes it to the reader through the artist interpreting, you know, those information. So those are big things. I definitely agree. Like mistakes, I've worked with people that did not complete their task. That's happened a few times. Earlier in my career, more often, you know, where it's like, you know, people, you know, it's like, let's do a book together, and everybody's excited. And so I go off and I write the whole, you know, I wrote this 48-page graphic novel and send it to them, and then nothing happens. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that. So yeah, finding ways to make it happen, doing a contract, or you know, making the plans, you know, yeah, you just have to be careful. It's so easy to get lost in, we're making comics. How cool is that? To you forget it's still a business. I've got to treat it like a business. I've got to be smart. Because, you know, I could easily, there's a lot of stuff I'd love to do comic wise that would make me as a business go broke in a heartbeat. So I have to go, okay, I can't do that. You know, I can't go out and hire, you know, certain A-listers to do every cover in my series just because I can't afford that. But you know that going in, or if you need that cover, then you plan for it. You find a way to make that happen. So yeah, it's all about planning and stuff like that. So yeah, it's easy to go over. So probably some of the bigger mistakes I've made were not reining myself in and letting my enthusiasm override my common sense, which is not hard to do.
Michael.
Well, I did not do all of the planning that apparently the rest of you all did. I would describe what I did as jumping in the deep end and then teaching myself how to swim. All I knew is that I had a story to tell, and it was one of those. I'm sure you guys can relate. You got a story in you that you have to tell. It's got to come out of you, and you just can't rest until you do. And that's what the Omenverse was like for me. And so I just kind of dove in. I'm like, well, here's my first comic. I didn't know any of the things that I needed to know about, how to properly write out a panel for your artist, or how to make room for the lettering, or how to make sure you got enough panels on the page, or how to do hit the beats on the page. I didn't know any of that. All I knew is I had this story and I wanted to tell it. But I suppose my biggest mistake was probably not really doing much research beyond having read and reviewed comics. So I mean that was, I would recommend like David T was talking about there, like looking into this stuff, but before you dive into it, that was. Because I got to tell you, I mean, looking back at my first couple of comics, I'm kind of like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure how much I like them now in retrospect, but you do get better. You gotta put out those mistakes. And as my writing professor would tell me, you're gonna, the first several things you write are just gonna be bad. That's just how it is. But it's one of those things that I just kind of learned as I went along. I learned about how to make this into a business by talking to people that had businesses that wanted to help me out with getting it started. I learned about all this publishing stuff on the way. Trying to find an artist. I went through like 4 artists before I finally found Tosin. It was just one nightmare after another with that. I suppose if I was going to give one bit of advice to somebody who's coming into this, it would be that this is not like Bobby was saying there, this game this is not a cheap game. This is expensive. It's going to be hard, and there's going to be struggles. But there's one thing I have found out in all of the dead ends I have run into: they're not actually dead ends. They're just another place to turn. And that's where I've come into this. Every time I've run into a road, I've come up with these long-standing plans. 4 or 5 times I came up with 4 business plans that I was certain were going to work perfectly, and they just fell apart at the end. And I've had to rebuild it, but put it all back together again. And it's been kind of a sacrifice game for me as far as making comics go. But at the same time, I love this. So I guess, it's, you could say it's my hobby, but I'm disabled, and this is all I do. I do this from the time I get up to the time I go to bed. It's not just writing comics. I got a podcast network and the whole 9 yards. I'm pimping this game 24 hours a day.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory, and we've only scratched the surface of this business.
Yeah.
But I want to take kind of a final flash round to get out of here before we do. There's a lot of stuff we haven't touched on. We really haven't talked about marketing. We haven't talked about the impact of social media. We haven't talked about web comics and how the technology is changing, almost on a daily basis nowadays. So, what's one thing that when you look at it, is the thing that we haven't at least touched on, you want to make sure everybody at least is considering if they're thinking about getting into the indie business? Mr. Taylor, sir, you're up first.
The one thing I would say is the most important thing in anything is to have the right frame. And you have to understand that nowadays things are kind of in subgroups. Like the way people experience life and experience pop culture is in whatever their subgroup is. Unfortunately, and a lot of that comes with a lot of infighting, which I've never agreed with. But you have to understand that that's kind of the way the world is now in terms of perception. So the thing to do is to kind of find your peeps and be good with that. Nobody writes anything that appeals to everybody. And I mean nobody. That would be nice if you could pin something that the whole world just says, that's it right there. But most people have to kind of find their target audience. So find your peeps. Yeah. Find the people that are down with the kind of stuff that you write, with your style, with what you say. They kind of like what you bring to the table. And then also your peeps, your peer group. like, us on this Zoom call, or people you're collaborating with, people that think like you do and have the same love and passion that you do, and have the, same comic knowledge or similar experiences, stuff like that, because those will be your brothers and your sisters in the trenches. Because like everybody's talked about, there's rough waters ahead if you want to do this, and there's hard times. So you have to have someone there with you. Just listening to the panel has encouraged my heart to let me know that my experiences aren't unique, because when you first start out, you think they are. You're like, oh, Lord, I thought it was going to just be this linear straight line. And I was going to go from being me to Stan Lee.
Yeah.
But when you listen to other people tell their story, it's like, no, there's all kind of stuff that happens. So again, to sum that up, I would say find your people. Don't be fighting with people that ain't your people. You're wasting your time. You're not going to make them see it like you do, and vice versa. Don't be wasting your time. If you follow me on Twitter, I stopped doing that a long time ago. It's a waste of time. Find people that are down with what you're about and what you love and what you respond to, and connect with them. That's what I would say.
Mr. Nash.
Well, I know we've only scratched the surface of the process, because you can talk to 10 different comic creators and you're going to get 10 different answers of how they put their books together. We all have, there's no one way to do it. And you have to find what works for you. Because really, all your reader cares about is the finished product, finished book. Is it good? Are they enjoying it? They don't care whether you wrote a full script or if you wrote it the old Marvel style, or if you and your artist just sat and talked it out and your artist went and laid it out and then you scripted it. They don't. That's extras. That's cool stuff to know. But what they want to know is, did you tell a good story? Is it cool? Are they enjoying it? So don't feel, because I run into people all the time that feel like, well, I saw a script book once, so I think I have to do it this way. And I don't like doing it this way. And I'm like, then you don't have to do it that way. There's a lot of experimentation that comes with comics that, and it's different too. It can be different for you each time. How I work with an artist I've never worked with before is different than how I work with an artist I've worked with multiple times, because we have a shorthand. I already know what that artist can do. That artist and I have worked together, so I know they're good at this, and I can play up those things. Or I know that I don't have to give as much information, because if I say it's a living room, they know what it is. They know what I'm thinking, as opposed to, if I don't know, I tend to overwrite it and go like, it's a living room. There's a couch and 2 chairs and an end table, that kind of thing. So those are things that are all part of the process that we could probably do 10 whole podcasts on that alone, of how to create comics.
Yeah.
But really, at the end of the day, you find what works with your team, because every writer works a little differently. Every artist works a little differently. And so you find what works for you guys as a team. And like I said earlier, I think magic can happen if the right creative people come together.
Mr. Nunneley, sir.
Well, actually, David, Taylor, and Bobby there really kind of picked up on the things I was going to talk about. I guess one thing left over there would be don't be afraid to do things in a unique fashion. Like for instance, there's a general set of rules that you can apply to making comics in a generic fashion. But don't be afraid to go outside of those lines, Part of the reason that people will come to you, like I like to quote Walt Disney on this one. He says, you gotta be unique to such an extent that people gotta come to you to get what you have. So that kind of thing. Try to find a niche in this that is going to fit your particular voice.
Mr. Pepose.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would really want to reinforce for anybody who wants to make indie comics, honestly, Kickstarter's your friend. I feel like there's a nice pendulum that swings between Kickstarter and the direct market, and I feel like they can both kind of feed on each other. I I think making comics, the real big hurdle is ultimately financial. It is a really tough business to kind of crack into, and it usually is fairly costly to one or multiple parties in the process. And Kickstarter is a really great way at helping defray that. Either if you're paying your team up front, sort of helping recoup your costs, or if your team is willing to roll the dice, sort of having a common pool to share your funds with. And the great thing about Kickstarter is, it really is a collaborative platform. My very first Kickstarter launched the same day as Scott Snyder, who wrote Batman and Justice League for quite some time. He launched his Kickstarter for Nocterra. In the direct market, Scott dropping a Beyonce and dropping a new creator-owned book, that'd be the kiss of death for me. On Kickstarter, it was like riding on a tsunami. It really kind of helped bump us up in a major way. And the great thing about Kickstarter is, as long as you fulfill your orders, people tend to come back, and so you're really able to kind of grow your platform campaign to campaign to campaign. I always say people like Charlie Stickney, the creator of White Ash, Pat Shand, who created Destiny New York, Russell Nahelty, who came up with Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, amongst many, many other names. Kat Kalamia, who just launched a new Kickstarter for Herethology today. They've built those audiences over time, and I think that's a really great way to make comics financially viable outside of the direct market system. And I think it's something that, up until a few years ago, a lot of creators turned their nose up at it, and I think that's a huge mistake. You are literally leaving money on the table, and so if you're going to roll the dice, roll it on yourself. And I think Kickstarter is a great way to make a return on that investment.
I like to, whenever I'm part of a Kickstarter, I like to tell people this is the perfect way to secure your pre-order. This guarantees you're going to get the book, and I find that people are like, I like that idea. And yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate, let's at least starting the conversation about indie comics here on the Comics Lair. We're definitely going to have to do it again, but before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. And of course, website, social media, and what's that latest book everybody needs to get to dive into your world. So, Bobby?
BobbyNash.com is my website. There's links to everything there. I'm author Bobby Nash on Facebook, Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram, and just at Bobby Nash on Twitter. I've got a Patreon page / Bobby Nash. I'm all over the place. Please stop by, say hello. Recent releases. I have a story in the Kolchak the Night Stalker 50th anniversary deluxe hardcover, which is a absolutely stunningly gorgeous book. With a beautiful Jerry Ordway cover of Kolchak fighting a vampire. It's wonderful. So yeah, that's my most recent, and there's a lot of comics coming this year. Comics is weird. It's like it's a very, very much either feast or famine. I'm writing no comics or a lot of comics. And last year I wrote 18. So wow. There's a lot of them that should come out this year. So.
Mr. Nunneley.
Well, you can find me at Comics Omen on Twitter and at Revelation Comic on Twitter. You can also find us at Patreon / Omen Comics. You can find us also on Global Comics. All of our comics are currently free to read on there, so that's a good place to check out both Revelation Comics and Omen Comics. Most recent books to check out. There's a martial arts fantasy comic I wrote last year called Dragon Girl Albino Warrior. Again, you can check that out there. You can also find my books on Wicked Publishing, the Wicked Publishing store. The other recent book from Revelation Comics is Seder #1, which is a supernatural kind of a slow burn, grimdark Viking horror comic that I wrote last year.
David P.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. It's my last name, first initial, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can also visit my website at davidpepose.com or sign up for my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pep news. And the final issue of Savage Avengers is hitting comic shops everywhere on the 22nd. And I will have a few more announcements coming from Marvel in the coming weeks. So a busy May ahead. Just follow me online.
By the way, I love that pep talks. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's very good. Very good.
And David.
Best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm on Twitter every day. My handle is DT2 Comics Chat. I'm there every day, so that's the best place to interact with me and all that. In terms of if you want to find all my materials in one place, that's on my website, davidtaylor2, the number 2, davidtaylor2.net. All my novels, all my comics, all my coloring books, my RPG, my short stories, my novellas, all there, okay? As well as my music, because I write music too. In terms of what we got coming out, I'm fulfilling my orders with Nephilim Wars, what you see behind me, for all my supporters. They've been very patient with me. Then I'm going to be sure the book is available on multiple platforms. And then Michael and I are working with David Nemesis Howard and Steve Sellers and Jeff Bracey on a project called Blood World. There's an Indiegogo campaign on that. You can just hashtag Blood World on Twitter and find it. 6 stories, 6 writers. It's all about an apocalyptic future, and it's a very expansive story world. So we cannot be prouder, all of us. We're just extremely proud to be a part of this. And so we definitely would appreciate the support, getting the book out. You get a lot of content for a little bit of money, so it's worth investing in. And like I said, I've got 2 other projects coming out. I have a novella that's actually on a countdown now for May 1st. For My Soldier, Serpents, and Sin. It's the aftermath after the first novel. And then I have the second novel coming out before year's end. I'm in final editing with that. So you follow me on any of my channels and I will let you know as all this stuff becomes available.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host tonight, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, thespeculative-fiction-academy.com, at creatingprose.com, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we'll see everybody again soon.